We're ready. We're ready. Starting off another new week.
That's right. Intellectual property rights and all. Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge, the most watched financial news in media. You can take all of the broadcast television, they can't come close. The amount of people that that are tuning in right now. So
awesome.
Bang. Thank you, everybody. NASDAQ up 105, Pete. That's about 0.8%. I've got the Dow higher by 232. That's about 6.5%. And the S&P up 26. So, for all of the sky is falling, folks out there. The sky's not falling, I guess.
Well, everybody's still reeling from Jackson Hole, John. They're out there fishing. I think Steve Leisman's out there. He's got a net, but I don't know if he's catching anything. But it's all about Powell.
Oh, yeah. And Steve is a great guy. And he used to joust with a lot of the folks on the shows.
He did.
For a whole host of reasons. But this is the Rebel's Edge, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We start off with the macro minute. We go down to the fantastic futures, and then we cover several stocks as we're going through the day. So let's start off with the macro minute, and I think Pete nailed it. It's the market's reaction to Jay Powell out at Jackson Hole. They knew that he'd talk tough all the way until Jackson Hole, Pete. And as we said, he'll keep talking tough, but he's not going to do anything. So that means that really we have until Friday when we get the jobs report. So that's going to be my part of the macro minute, Pete.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's correct, John, because you look at last week and how strong things closed, and you look at everything going on at Jackson Hole. Is there is nobody more transparent, and that was something I had an opportunity to talk to a group of people on Friday on TV, John, and was saying exactly that. The guy's transparency is there, and he's going to give you exactly what they're going to do and give you a kind of the game plan of it, right? And because of that, I would say the overwhelming thing that I took away so far is sort of something that's been the same. He talked about inflation, and he said we're not at 2% yet. I think that says it all.
I agree. But now, Pete, we get into the realm of futures with fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures. The
That's
Merc better
Pete's favorite part.
That.
Yeah, that's Pete's favorite part, folks. All right, my fantastic futures, Pete, is you're not going to see platinum, palladium, and silver and gold moving up unless they think that maybe rates are topping out. Now, that doesn't mean that they're done, but it certainly means that people are saying, well, maybe we've seen the high for rates. That's my take on why platinum is up like almost 3% today, Pete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that one as well, John. I'm going to jump over to sugar. So we talk about fantastic futures. A lot of the time you hear me talk about energy, particularly crude or nat gas or whatever, what have you. It doesn't really matter. But how about this? Since July, coming in July, it was $22, right? Then you get to now and it's 25.5. We are right near the year-to-date highs, John, in sugar. Now, why is that? Well, you got a combination of a couple of things. One is weather, which is affecting supply right now for sure. And demand just continues to rise and rise and rise. So we're seeing that price just continue to move higher. So unless we see something change in the metrics that we're looking at, I think sugar's got a little bit further to go, John, and maybe not year-to-date highs right now, but sometime in the very near future.
Yep. Sugar's up almost 3% as well today, folks. So pretty big move for sugar, which is part of almost everything. It's hard to find products that don't have a little sugar in them, even a lot of them that you don't suspect would ever have sugar in them, like milk has a fair amount of sugar in it, as it turns out, Pete. All right, let's talk about VSF, because this one's up double digits again. It's only been public basically for 10 days. They came public through a special purpose acquisition company, or a SPAC, and this is a Vietnamese EV maker, Pete, that's worth more than, I think, Chrysler, GM, and Ford combined. And you know how many vehicles they've cranked out, Pete, so far? In the first half of 2023, 11,300.
Yes.
And it's worth more than all of those car companies put together?
I think they're looking out into the future just a little bit early, John, but this thing is absolutely on fire. And to your point, it's only been around, what, a couple of weeks. And meanwhile, the stock started off at $15, and here we are at $90. So, and we've been floating around. It might be in the 80s now. We all know one thing. There's going to be volume when you see a stock moving like that, and there's going to be a lot of volatility. So we're seeing exactly that right now. They've only lost, John, $2.1 billion so far as a company. So at least they're keeping things nice and tight. But I say that in jest, of course. But, you know, the founder still has control over 99% of this company. So it is something that's it's interesting. I think that guy might have a smile on his face. And, John, going forward, they do have a lot of possibilities in a lot of different areas. And I think that's what's got people so excited about this thing, at least right now.
Yep. It is a stock, Pete, that in the 10 days it's been out there has been up or down, 20 to 30% on virtually every day in the 10 or 12 days that it's been traded. It's just amazing. All right. Let's take a look at one that Buffett put some money in years ago, Pete, and it's also in the EV space. This is BYD, not Boyd Gaming, but BYDDY is the symbol here in the U.S. for the ADR of this one. Like I say, Buffett put money into China's EV company years ago, and they got a pretty good bounce, not just from that, Pete, but from the fact that they deliver a ton of EVs every year. In fact, they sold about 1.5 billion of them last year, or rather in the 6 months ending June 30th. That was up over 200% year over year.
Yeah, when you look at the profits, absolutely magnificent. You look at the revenue, you look at the balance sheet, John, and a lot of the time you look at the balance sheet of a lot of these companies and you're like, there's the problem. These guys are cash burn or whatever. Not the case. They're absolutely there. They check every part that you want to go through and say, should I look at this? Should I at least take a little bit of time and look at this? I would say the answer is yes. I think you ought to look at it because they've got plenty of cash. Their cash to debt is phenomenal. Their free cash flow is phenomenal. It's only $33 billion. So when you look at a lot of the numbers and you start adding them up, you could see why this would be a name that, if nothing else, you should have it on your screens and at least take a peek once in a while. Very, very interesting company that's got a lot of room, and they're doing things right, at least right now.
Yep, they certainly are. And it's an EV company, Pete, that knows who they are. Some of these companies think that they can either be a luxury EV company and compete, and others think that they need to mass produce, but they produce crap. These guys are doing it right, I think, and it's why Buffett put his money where his mouth was on it. All right, let's talk about Hawaiian Electric. Hardly a day goes by since the terrible Maui wildfires that this one's not been in the news. And it's been in the news for going down 30, 40% and going up about the same amount today. It's up better than 30%, Pete. And here was what I really took away from it. The CEO said, okay, the county has sued us, so now we have to give our side of the story. Our side of the story is that high winds caused the power lines to drop in certain areas. That may have started the fire. The Maui Fire Department came in and put out the fire and then announced, quote, that they had extinguished the fire. Hours later, the fire reignited. And here's the kicker, Pete. The power had been cut by HE, Hawaiian Electric, for 4 hours at that point. So it wasn't their lines that did it on the second fire that became the deadly fire that killed all those people and burned down Lahaina. So, wow, that's kind of a blockbuster out there, but this is what happened over there.
Yeah, and John, we knew they'd come out and have some sort of a reaction to what had already put them in the corner, but they came out swinging. And it looks like, factually, they look like, at least right now, like they are in the right and all those accusers are in the wrong. Matter of fact, the quote was factually and illegally irresponsible was the quote from the CEO. He was pretty ticked off, understandably so. This is one of those things, John, where this is going to probably play out for a very long period of time. We both know that. But we were thinking that Hawaiian Electric was basically going to go by the way of the dodo bird. Maybe they can hang around a little bit longer. I still don't like their sheets, John. They don't look good. Balance sheet is tough. All of that. Free cash flow. It's not a cash flow. It's a cash burn. There's a lot of problems when you look at the company. But they could still hang around, I think, for a while. And if they're right, they might even get a little bit of money out of the state of Hawaii.
Yeah, well, because they might have to, Pete.
Yeah.
And if they're not to blame for this, if indeed it is because the fire department didn't properly extinguish the blaze,
Right.
Or something else started the second blaze, that laser. Because people, if you look at the conspiracy theories on this one, Pete, it is everywhere from Bill Gates and Oprah and Zuckerberg and all these guys. Why didn't their homes get burned? I'm not that conspiracy theorist on this one, but I am saying that it seems that the fire department may not have been quite as diligent as they needed to be. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk, Pete, about NVCR, Novocure, because this gives you an idea, Pete, of all the times that you've been so right about be really careful. Just because somebody passes a phase 1 or phase 2, they need to get all the way through that phase 3 to be able to sell their drugs and so forth. And this one was going after a tumor, basically for ovarian cancer, that apparently didn't work in phase 3, Pete.
Yeah. Isn't that a shame? I mean, we're all sad about that aspect of this whole thing, but I would say that, and thank you for bringing that up, John, but you and I both talk about this all the time. Phase 1's fantastic. Phase 2 is fantastic. Phase 3, for crying out, that's fantastic. But until you can get this out into the public, it's just something sitting there as a potential going forward. Well, this one, unfortunately, they weren't able to reach the numbers that they needed to get. And because of that, that's why this stock is absolutely hammered today. And it's why you have to be a little bit cautious. If you are somebody who is going to be in something like this in the future, there are ways to kind of protect yourself in the options world. Buy a put or something to try to protect yourself, especially if something has really run, which they usually do. You go through phase 1, you're already at phase 2, now you're in phase 3. A lot of things can still happen, and not all of them are great. So unfortunately, in this case, it wasn't great. They stumbled, and it's a company that doesn't have a whole lot really. They've got a pipeline, John, but it's not massive, and that would be a concern as well. They do have a decent pipeline. I wouldn't say it's great.
Yeah, and all of those, to your point also, Pete, the pipeline, on the one hand, it's great. On the other hand, and that's the intellectual property or IP, but the other hand is those are all just basically holes in the water that you throw money into, just like a boat. Because, you're sitting there trying to get the thing through phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3. Then you get paid when you get through phase 3 successfully. But these guys, with this particular treatment, Pete, they didn't meet the primary endpoint. As soon as you see that, you got to hit sell, sell, sell.
Yeah.
Because
that's brutal.
Yeah. All right. So I know you were at the state fair, the Minnesota State Fair, perhaps the biggest state fair in the country. And you were wandering around trying things like chocolate-covered pickles or something like that, which I can't even imagine why that would be good. Or
John,
good for you.
The food at the fair is phenomenal. I was walking around. I was there on Saturday. I was there again on Sunday. I did the huddle from there on Sunday from 10 to noon Central Time. A lot of fun. A lot of people were coming up and bringing us food and and everything, and lemonades and coffees and you name it. But it was a lot of fun. And what did we talk about there? We talked about the fact that football in week 0, they're calling it, John, was pretty impressive. And I'll tell you, I was really impressed with two people, I should say. Caleb Williams, first half, he looked okay. His numbers were okay. they weren't astronomical. He's a Heisman guy. He's a guy that literally people are saying he's the first pick in the draft next year from USC. They're playing San Jose State. Why is he not doing better? Well, he kind of shook off a little bit of that rust in the first half. Second half, he was on fire, John. They put a hurting on those guys in a big way. They ended up, I think it was 56-23 or something like that. They put up plenty of points. Caleb had a great day, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That's what you're looking for. But the one that I really like, John, and a lot of people have not talked about this. There's a guy out there, right? Sam Hartman. He played at Wake Forest. Not a lot of people follow Wake Forest football, but this kid was a stud. He'd already played there for like 5-6 years. Now he's at Notre Dame for his final year. Because, John, because of COVID, they allowed you to do a lot of different things, injuries and this and that. There's a kid at the University of Minnesota is in his 7th year. So I know all too well. I wouldn't even want to do that, by the way. But anyway, Sam Hartman's with Notre Dame. He absolutely lit up Navy. We don't know how good or bad Navy would be, but they generally play very hard. They got a lot of guys that are really good athletes that are literally, they got the hearts that you want out of your players for sure. But Sam Hartman showed him a little something as a quarterback, and those 3 All-Americans in front of him, they look pretty good too, because I don't think I even saw one speck of dirt from Dublin on his uniform. But a lot of fun to watch, and it's good to see these quarterbacks. I think we've got a lot of really good quarterbacks in college football this year. Many of them, just like this year, are going to be in next year's draft. It's going to be pretty impressive. But did you get a chance to watch a Notre Dame game, John, or no?
I did, a little, Pete, because I had a couple friends that went over for it. Because I think Notre Dame is the only team that they let host in that stadium. Because it's a stadium for Hurley, I think, primarily. But it looks like a football stadium because they draw those kind of crowds for Hurley over there in Ireland, in Dublin in particular. But yeah, a lot of Chicagoans that I was with a week ago, Pete, were going over for the game because there's, of course, a huge Chicago contingent for Notre Dame. That team looks like they're built to win. And I don't mean next year, I mean now. So you've talked forever about Alt, that huge kid, that he could be the number 1 pick in the draft, Pete. Because that kid is, he's a man. He was a man in high school, for God's sake. High school. Yeah. So he's, by the way, a big offensive tackle there, folks. And you won't find too many as good, and you won't find anybody better than him. And his dad was what, Pete, a 10-year All-Pro?
Yeah, for Kansas City. He's in the Ring of Honor. Every time I go to Kansas City, I take a picture of it and I send it to him because John and I go all the way back. He and I played football against each other in high school, then at Iowa, and I was at Minnesota. So I got tired of him beating the crap out of me, I can tell you that. He's only 6'9", 340. I mean, he's just a little fella. But and the kid, sons, the kid's as big as he was, maybe bigger, and probably in better shape just because they focus so much on that now. It's unbelievable. John, speaking of that, and keeping it with the NFL and keeping it with quarterbacks in the NFL, this Trey Lance thing. I mean, I think everybody heard about it, anywhere because it's big news. The guy was the number 3 pick in the draft. San Francisco 49ers literally gave away an entire year's worth of draft picks and you name it to get this kid because they wanted him that bad. Now, I know the family pretty well. I know a lot about them. They're from Marshall, Minnesota. He's coming out of high school and he got an opportunity up at North Dakota State to be the quarterback because Minnesota recruited him, but they didn't think he'd play quarterback. Well, they were wrong. And the kid had an unbelievable 1 year at North Dakota State. The second year was COVID year. He decided not to play, but he did play in 1 game. So here's a guy that now he's in the NFL a couple years and he's still not quite clicking. Well, John, you and I have seen this time and time again where you draft a guy, you need a little bit of time generally. They usually don't just step in, especially somebody who played 1 year in 1 game. So I think San Francisco, may have bit off more than they could chew when they did all of the picks to be able to get him. But then they didn't even allow the kid to get to the point where he can show them whether or not he really is NFL worthy. Well, Dallas Cowboys got him, and they gave up a 4th-round pick. So my question to you is, where in the hell were the other 30 teams, including my Minnesota Vikings here, who Kirk Cousins is 35. Who's his backup? This kid Mullins? He ain't going anywhere. The kid they just drafted, Hall from BYU, well, they took him in like the 5th round. I'm sure they don't think that highly of him. They got a kid from the XFL. So what is wrong with the other teams that they didn't figure out that this talented kid could be there someday? And the worst is you give up a 3rd or 4th round draft pick for him.
Yeah, well, like you said, Pete, we've seen Ditka when he went down to New Orleans and gave up, a couple years worth of draft picks to draft a kid that had a really bad problem with weed and couldn't stay eligible because of it, because he'd test positive, too often, and it kind of destroyed his drive as well. There are a bunch of, the history of the NFL is littered with bad trades like this. But I agree with you. 1 year is not enough. And so if you're going to be one of the teams that goes for this kid, and obviously Dallas did, fine. Let him sit there behind Zach for a little bit and learn, because he's going to need to do that. As good as he was at North Dakota State, did Wentz play there also? Yeah. I mean, you can bring out pro quarterbacks out of there, obviously, and wide receivers, obviously, but and offensive linemen, obviously. I mean, it's a great program. But if you only played 1 year, that's not enough to develop the skills you need to be an NFL stud. You got to have some time behind you. Now, we're going to see whether Richardson makes me a liar by outperforming like crazy, because he's been doing pretty good. The Florida quarterback, of course, Richardson, that lit him up in at the combine and so forth. But I don't think that you're really ready from just 1 year of playing. And I think that this is something that if the Cowboys nurture Trey Lance, Pete, he will be their quarterback for decades, or at least a decade. That's my pick.
He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the intelligence, he's got all of those factors, and now he just needs the experience. Well, how do you get that? You sit behind Dak Prescott, right? I mean, Dak is one of the good – he's not the best quarterback in the NFL, but he's a very good quarterback. He throws way too many interceptions. But at least he could learn from him, watching him. And by the way, Dallas has a hell of a lot of really good receivers on that team, John, and some decent running backs, even though Ezekiel Elliott's gone. Pollard's not so bad. So they've got running backs. They got that offensive line. They got great receivers, always have tight ends. I think that it is the right place for him to learn behind Dak, and then maybe he can step in and show everybody who he really is, because I don't think he's had that opportunity yet. Shoot, he had 1 year where he was out for the year with an injury, and then he had a second year where he was just kind of stumbling along, trying to recover still. So it's not like we're seeing the very best of Trey Lance. I think he's got a lot more in him.
Yeah, I would give him, especially if he can play behind Dak, who I called Zach earlier. But if he can play behind Dak, either in some mop-up games, Pete, and or just learning how a good quarterback thinks, not a great quarterback, because I don't think Dak is great, but behind a good quarterback and a good system, I agree with you. I think Trey Lance could be a great future for the Cowboys, and they stole him. Yeah. So more power to them. I can't believe San Francisco gave up on him so soon, but that's the nature of the beast, I guess. All right. Well, we're going to be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time, folks. So please tune in then. And until then, tell a friend about the show. We'll see you tomorrow.